I'm Emmett and I like to make stuff, specifically toy swords, but no more. It's time to get real. No more damage than was already there. But that doesn't matter because it's time to get real. Hey, look at this, it's not real. What about this one? Nope. These two look kind of real. Well, they're not, they're wood. Well, this one's wood. This one's like paper mache. You could probably break it if you smacked it lightly against something. I don't really know what I was thinking with that one. But this is my sister-in-law's. I did not make this. I'm just borrowing it indefinitely. I did, however, make this one, which I think turned out pretty well. I've been tinkering around with forging a little bit. Just knives, nothing monetary. I started out just using a torch. I just wanted to see if I could. I was just danking around. I didn't actually think that I would get anywhere, but I ended up making a much cruder knife. This was just a piece of flat bar that I heated up and pounded out. I was a little too heavy-handed with the hammer strokes and I didn't want to get it too thin, so that's why I left a lot of those dinks and scratches in there, which I don't know how bad that is, because like I feel like at some point I saw like a more historical reproduction knife somewhere that had a lot of these things. So maybe that's something that's like, you know, realistically in history, if you were just making a knife, it wouldn't be perfectly polished. I don't know. I know there was a larger variety of knives and swords than we're really aware of, and that not all of them were all that high quality. So hey, there's plenty of people on YouTube that can make like really, really polished, really well-made swords and knives. I'm here to represent the other end of the spectrum, the crappy everyday knives. I haven't actually gotten to a sword yet. I was hoping this one would end up being a little longer and I could call it a short sword. It is not that long. It's not even as long as like a machete or anything. So, just a knife. I'm getting there. I'm warming up to it. My goal is to one day make like a fully functional sword. Actually, my goal would be to make a real version of this because I really like this one. Just the look of it as a prop. But yeah, anyway. I started out with the torch, but then my neighbor actually loaned me his little forge because I guess he doesn't use it that much. I've had that for a while. Maybe I should give it back to him. I don't know. I don't talk to him very much. But he found out I was making knives and was like, hey, take this. Play around with it. So I did. Honestly, the forging process isn't that complicated. It requires some finesse. It requires knowing what you're doing. But really, you heat up some metal and pound it out and then grind it down. The most complicated part of it is the heat treatment. And I can't even really fully wrap my head around all the science of it. There's videos if you want to look up like quenching and tempering. There's other resources out there. I don't really understand it on like the molecular level and things like that. The most basic understanding that I have, assuming that I'm understanding it correctly, is that if you heat up the metal and cool it down quickly, that will harden it. And if you heat it up and then let it cool slowly, that will soften it. And so going back and forth between these two, you want to try and find a happy medium where it's hard enough to keep an edge, but soft enough that it won't like chip and break. Because really durable swords are usually spring tempered, where they're kind of bouncy and stretchy, and that's part of the softening process. I have no idea if I'm doing the quenching and tempering right, and I've been afraid to like really stress test my beautiful little knife. So yeah, at some point I'll probably be making more for the purpose of like actually figuring out, am I doing this correctly? Because I don't know. I was kind of recording off and on because sometimes I just tinker around with it during break while I'm at work. And then sometimes I come in like on the weekend and I bring the camera and I film. So we have some montage footage. I'll play some of that. and then go over some more of the details. So the forge actually works kind of similar to how I was doing it with the torch anyway. It's just that it's a contained box that keeps the heat on, and I don't have to keep turning the torch on and then setting it down to hammer the metal and then turning it on again. I can just have the fire going, take the metal in and out at my leisure. I don't know why I geek out about that so much, because yeah, that's how a forge works, but I was just like, whoa, I can just keep the fire on and like stick the metal in there. Wow. I started out using this old anvil that my dad just had in the barn for as long as I can remember. I don't know what he was using it for, just kind of like saddle maintenance, I think. But I started out using that, but the frame was really flimsy. So at one point, I decided to make my own anvil. Actually, well, it started out that I was wanting to make a new frame for the old anvil, but then I thought, while I'm at it, I might as well just make a whole new anvil. But then the thing is, though, I ended up using the old anvil more than the new anvil, I think. But it's detachable, I can swap them out. So, doesn't hurt anything. Either way, I'll probably end up like using one anvil for some projects and one anvil for another one. I just don't really know like what the pros and cons would be exactly, but I have a stronger anvil stand now. It doesn't bounce around so much. I probably am not heating it up as much as I should, because looking at it now, like I think as I went on, I got more comfortable heating it up, but then some of the footage here, I'm like, that does not look all that hot. Hello, just thought I'd pop in for a little bit to offer some extra information, because in between filming this video and editing it, I actually got to see a little bit of a blacksmithing demonstration, and I learned a few things. Mainly, you don't want to overheat the metal, because the more you heat it up, and like if it gets bright orange, you can actually lose carbon, because heating it up, like it brings that to the surface, and then when it cools down, it kind of like falls off in little chips. I didn't realize you wanted to hold on to that. I was just thinking the hotter I get it, the more malleable it is, the more time I have to work with it. But apparently no, you want to keep that carbon in the metal because it actually helps the flexibility, I think. Something like that. I'm still a little lost with how it all works on a molecular structure, but high carbon makes for better swords and knives. The other thing that I learned, and this is more just like a little tip, because I was having trouble with a lot of little like hammer marks. I thought they were all just hammer marks, and you have to kind of grind it down, like a lot of these little marks and things. But actually what the guy was doing is like he was taking a wire brush and like scraping off the metal while it was still red, and then scraping off his anvil as well to get rid of all that slag, because apparently if like that slag, which is the carbon coming to the surface and then cooling and then falling off, if that is still in contact with the blade while you're hammering it, that can actually smash a bunch of little dents into it. So if you're to the point where you're trying to flatten out the blade and you're smacking it into a bunch of excess carbon that's falling off, like that'll just make it more rough. So a couple of things there. Just thought it would be important to note. Oh yeah, I tried to make a cross guard by like mashing two pieces together and twisting them, but like as hot, like I got them so hot they were liquefying, but the two wouldn't fuse together. So there's something that I'm missing there, because I know you can pound multiple pieces of metal together. I don't know what the trick is though, because I got them to liquefy, but then they always came loose and untangled themselves. So then at one point I thought maybe I'd make a cross guard out of like an old handle, and I just flattened it out, but I didn't think I got it very even. So then I just got like a piece of flat bar from Tractor Supply, cut a hole in it, and bent the ends. I don't think I even warmed it up at all. I just bent it in the vise and then used that as the guard. I did some heat tempering tests with some scrap metal, and I couldn't tell that much of a difference. Like, I beat the metal that wasn't tempered, and then I tried the one that was tempered, like quenched and tempered, and it didn't really put up that much more resistance. Like, theoretically, once you quench it and temper it, it should be a lot more durable. And though I think at one point I did test it, like I clamped both of them to a table and then just kind of like bounced a hammer on them. I wasn't like trying to beat them. I was just seeing how springy they were. And the one that I had tempered or heat treated was bouncier. So there's that. It's not any more durable, but it's bouncier. And a lot of this could also depend on the type of steel I'm using. I'm just using scrap metal. I don't know like what the grade of steel is. At some point I'm going to need to get like an actual belt sander. I mean, I have an actual belt sander, but it's just like my dad's old belt sander. And in order to sharpen and shape the blade, I just clamped it down in a vise, because it's a hand sander. It's not like a table sander. So I turned it into a table sander by putting it in the vise. I did end up using a grinder, an angle grinder on it a little bit, just to flatten out all those little dinks and scratches and hammer marks. Because just sanding it with the belt sander takes forever, and I get impatient. So I did start using a grinder just as the preliminary, like, I'm gonna cut all this off and then smooth it out with the belt sander later. And this is all before I like quench it and temper it. You're supposed to get it hot enough that it just loses its magnetism, so that's, I have a little magnet on a string that I'm kind of like testing it on. Stuck it in the oven to try and temper it. And everywhere I look, I hear a different formula for what temperature the oven should be and how long you put it in there. So I don't even know if I did it right or not. It is what it is. There's always a lot of oil residue covering it after you quench it. Oh yeah, and I made a little oil drum for the quenching, which I probably should have made it bigger. At first, all I was thinking was just what I needed at the time. I didn't want to make anything too big. I needed something that would just hold 2 gallons of vegetable oil, because that's what I got. But it actually wasn't even that much. I could have made it a little taller and then used all the vegetable oil. There was a little bit left over. And then I could just use the same container to quench other blades in it, because this is a fairly short pipe. And if I had cut it longer, I could have quenched longer blades in it. I'll need a longer one if I'm going to do anything actually sword length, probably. But yeah, I welded a little lip on, and I made a whole lid for it with clamps, and I even, I TIG welded the clamps onto the lid so that you can slide it on and off and then tighten them down really tight. That should eliminate, or at the very least downsize, any potential spills. Because you know what happens when you spill oil. Greta Thunberg puts a bounty on your head, and then you got a bunch of snot-nosed college students trying to throw tomato sauce on your paintings. You wouldn't destroy this thing, would you? I mean, look at it. It's not even oil, it's watercolor. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna beat you to the punch. There you go. I learned that I'm not very good at telling wood apart. I made kind of the templates for the handle scales just out of what I had lying around, which was pine, and then Dad told me not to use that. I mean, I actually cracked it, and I knew that I wasn't going to use that, but Dad told me to use oak. So then I kept grabbing pieces of wood, like, is this oak? No. Is this oak? No. Is this oak? So eventually I found it, and that's what I made the handle scales out of. I epoxied them on, and then pounded some brass pins through it, then kind of ground everything down. It took me until today, and by today I mean when I was working on this project, to realize why they call it a ball peen hammer. It's for peening pins. At least, I assume. I just connected those dots. I was trying to figure out, like, how am I gonna secure these pins? Oh, wait. I was able to get it pretty sharp. Any trouble that I had cutting the cutting materials was probably a skill issue. Because when it works pretty well. Schwa. Not the cleanest cut. Huh? It's a little straighter. Like, if it doesn't cut through clean, you can see a lot of tears and rips. Alright, so that is how I made a knife. And obviously, just to clarify, I'm not done making toy swords. I'm always going to be making props and things along those lines. I just like a good bit, you know. I needed a cold open. And this does mark a first step down a new path, even if I'm not entirely leaving the old ones. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day. And tune in next time to find out how I made a sheath. Or more specifically, how I fixed a sheath that I didn't quite make right the first time.